Welcome to the Rotary Club of Seattle, the fourth oldest and one of the largest Rotary clubs in the world. For those visiting, I'm the club's president, Mark Wright. It's great to have all of you here today. So we have a great program for you today. Author and poet and filmmaker Sherman Alexie is here. We'll have a conversation with Sherman up on stage in just a little bit. And he'll also be signing copies, or at least inscribing. A lot of the books have been signed already. After the meeting, Rick from Elliott Bay is here with Sherman's new memoir and some of his other books. So after the meeting, feel free to look for Rick and Sherman right outside the ballroom doors here. Our invocation today will be led by past President Laura Rearman. After that, Dr. Skip Rowland and Freeman Fong will lead us in song. Laura?
Thank you. I'm going to tell you a little story first. Sherman Alexie's writing career nearly ended before it began. It began in a poetry class. Thank you. Sherman Alexie's writing career nearly ended before it began. It began in a poetry class at WSU when his professor handed him a volume of Adrian Lewis's work. Adrian Lewis is a well-known poet and an enrolled member of the Paiute tribe. The first line of the poem said, "Oh, Uncle Adrian, I'm in the reservation of my mind." In an interview 4 years ago, Sherman said, being tribal, being from a reservation, and the fact that you could never leave, as soon as I saw the poem, I knew I could write about myself. Before, I was always wearing a mask. I read it and thought, this is what I want to do. He graduated from college, a published poet in several Native American journals. He then hit a dry spell. Back on the reservation, no job, publishers rejecting his poems. He wrote a letter he described as ranting and raving to Adrian Lewis. He got a letter back with $50 taped to the letter and the message that said, "Keep writing your poems." That was the most important $50 I ever received, Sherman said. He used it to buy typewriter ribbons. His personal experience of being on a reservation both described his actual place and the limits he felt. His experience of going beyond those limits applies to each of us. Please join me in prayer. We pray for the courage to realize the limits we put on ourselves, the courage to recognize messages we read, see, or hear that resonate deep within. This is what I want to do. The courage to pursue this true self through hard times. We pray for the compassion to encourage those who are struggling to get outside of and beyond their own boundaries. To encourage with our words and actions. To encourage with $50 for typewriter ribbons. We pray for the fulfillment of our own true potential and the compassion to step up to encourage others. Amen.
So now for our main program. I've been looking forward to this ever since Sherman agreed to come back to the Rotary Club of Seattle. I first met Sherman Alexie, I think it was in 1992. He was an up-and-coming young writer, as past President Laura was referring to, and I was the co-host of a morning news program in Spokane called Good Morning Northwest. And I remember we were excited that this homegrown talent was going to come on our air and join us on Good Morning Northwest, an incredible half hour of television in Spokane. To be honest, I don't remember the specifics of the interview, Sherman, but I do remember Sherman. I remember being so impressed by this young guy. He had an intellect that was just so apparent and a humility that was equally apparent. And he had such a way with words. And it just felt good to be with him, to be around him. A lot has happened since then. Sherman Alexie is one of the most celebrated writers in America. I'd read off the names of the awards that Sherman has received, but there are simply too many. I just want to say what a pleasure it is to have you back. Please give a warm Seattle 4 welcome to Sherman Alexie.
I still have the VHS copy of that interview. I haven't watched it in years. but I vividly remember being terrified, and I was frozen. And one of my good friends, her daughter, who was maybe 5 years old then, they were watching it, and she turned to her mom and said, "What did Uncle Sherman do to his neck?" Because in order to look at Mark, I was moving my whole body.
So I've learned a lot about television in the past 25 years, and one thing I tell guests now, Sherman, is ignore the cameras and look at me, and we'll have our conversation. I should have told you that.
And sit on the edge of the chair. I don't know. I'm still uncomfortable. I'm just honest about it now.
That's awesome. So Sherman, I've thought a lot about today over the past few weeks, and I keep coming back to a word, to destiny. To me, it's almost as if you knew all of this would happen, the good and the bad, and that you would become what the universe intended you to be. I don't know if that's me. Does it feel like that to you? No, I mean, that this is kind of meant to be. Your career, your life, what you do.
Well, I'm laughing because on the first date with my now wife, and that was in December of 1992, so I've known you a few months longer. I was better on that date than my date with you, and I hope. But during the date, I actually told my wife that I was going to be a famous writer. And at that point, I had my one little poetry book. And she said, "You said it in such a way, and you said it that you were so sure of yourself that I wasn't positive I was going to go on a second date with you." So I had huge ambitions, but we all have huge ambitions. And I mean, I was a reservation kid. My mom and dad hadn't graduated high school. Nobody had ever gone to college. So the idea of having any kind of literary career, let alone the one that's happened. I always think of that movie Broadcast News, where William Hurt says to Albert Brooks, "What do you do when your reality exceeds your dreams?" And Albert Brooks says, "You keep quiet about it." I'm not very quiet about it. But the thing is, I mean, it's the kind of thing that's possible in only a few societies and countries throughout history. That somebody from the lower caste, that somebody from the kind of place I'm from, the poverty, fought through the real and imaginary, the social, political, economic boundaries to make it to this place. So I'm proud and happy, and I'm very lucky.
That's interesting that you say that. I have a friend who's a chef from France, and he said he left France because of that's what you're talking about. He said in France, unless you're born to a doctor, you are not going to become a doctor. And I had no idea that it was so stratified, even in a country as advanced as France. So he left France, and he's here, and he's living his dream, and just opened a new restaurant. You found success fairly early in your career. In 1993, you won the Penn Faulkner Award for The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fistfight in Heaven. In 2007, you also won the National Book Award for The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. You're now working on the screenplay to that book.
Yeah, right now, actually, my producers came to town. They're boot camping me because I'm a little bit late.
What does boot camping mean?
Like 7 months late on delivering this boot camping. Yesterday I wrote for 16 hours with one of the producers standing right here. So
That's gotta be fun.
That attendance thing, as you were, no. I don't even have 100% attendance in my own life. So for those of you who've done that for years and years, it's so amazing, and I'm jealous of your discipline and self-esteem.
This is pretty exciting, though, that, I mean, this is not just a little movie deal. This is a big movie deal.
No, it's big. I mean, I've said no for a long time because it's Hollywood. And Native American representation in Hollywood has not been great. I mean, number one, Native Americans rarely play Native Americans in the movies. So you could say there's been a long history of, Italians being stereotyped while playing Indians. And yeah, I don't look anything like Salminio. But actually, I do kind of look like Salminio. But as I age, I'm looking more and more Cuban. But soon to be a Castro brother. I've said no for years because of worried about the exploitation. But the team that came to me this last time, it's two production companies. One of them is Donner Company. Maybe some of you know Lauren and Richard Donner because they have a place up here, and I've actually seen them a couple times years ago at various fundraisers. But they've made the X-Men movies. They made Deadpool recently. Hugh Jackman is one of the producers, so Wolverine's in my cell phone. Wolverine's my spirit animal, so it works out well. It's not true. And then the other production company are the guys who made the Twilight films and Fault in Our Stars, so it's pretty amazing. And so I'm writing the screenplay, I'm a producer, it's contractually guaranteed that only Native American actors will portray Native American characters, and so so in fact, leaving here, I'll walk to my office and start, he's waiting, he's texted me like 3 times since I've been sitting here. When are you going to get here? When are you going to get here? And I texted back, I'm with the Rotarians. And yes. And he said, aren't those the ones that control the world? I said, no, that's the Illuminati. The Rotarians are the nice Illuminati. They control everything, but, they're really kind about it.
So when we were chatting over lunch, your new book has titles like, the chapters have titles like Chapter 117. This book has how many chapters?
I don't know. 172, I think?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Why so many chapters?
Well, they're not big chapters.
No.
Some of the chapters are poems. It's interesting, the illusion, because the reviews of it have been great, but some people talk about how big the book is, and it has a lot of pages, but they're poems, so there's white space. I mean, there's poems, and there's little short chapters. One of the chapters is because I realized it one day. I was working and I realized the memoir is about my really contentious relationship with my mother, who was, I think, an undiagnosed bipolar person. I'm diagnosed, so, I mean, she was arrogant and opinionated and mercurial and sucked up all the attention in any room she walked into. She just talked and talked and talked and talked and just dominated every place she went. I don't know why we didn't get along. And but one day I was sitting there just thinking and working, and I realized that memoir is a partial anagram for mom noir. And I thought, somebody had to have said that before. That's such an obvious thing. It's so funny and it's so obscure and it's so writer, geek, nerd. It's so, pretentious Scrabble player stuff. I thought somebody must have thought this before, and I Googled it. I put in, memoir, anagram, mom noir, and nothing. And I thought, am I the first one to think this? And so I emailed Mary Carr, who's a very famous memoirist, wrote Liars Club, and she's a friend of mine. So I emailed her. I thought, if somebody knows, it's Mary Carr. So I emailed her, and then I heard nothing, and then she tweeted it instantly. Sherman Alexie just emailed me and said, memoir is a partial anagram for mom noir. And like 100 people liked it, and then one woman wrote, no. And that no made me know I wanted to put it in the book. So it just says one sentence, and that's a whole chapter. So there are 80,000 words in the book. That's not a whole lot. It's okay. I know you're from a short attention span, low attendance generation now, all of you who are my age and older. Yeah, but it's really,
Yeah.
my mom was a quilter. In fact, that's often throughout our childhood, that was the way in which we ate, was my mom selling her quilts. So as I was working on the book and going on all these tangents and jumping in time to the past, present, way back when also into our tribal history, my wife read an early draft and she finished it, and then she said, "You know, Sherman, you're making a quilt." So the book itself is sort of in the shape of a quilt with reoccurring patterns, reoccurring colors, reoccurring stories. Yeah. So that's the shape of the book.
I want you to read, first of all, the cover picture. Your mother looks like a Hollywood starlet. She's beautiful.
Oh, she was ridiculous. I don't know if any of you had Rita Hayworth for a mom. Yeah, I did, and it creates. Well, you're pretty Rita Hayworth yourself there. So, so am I hitting on somebody at the Rotary meeting?
Sherman, we have a thing called the four-way test, and I'm just going to let you decide if you just violated it.
Well, it is the truth. So, but she was really striking. I mean, incredibly beautiful and charismatic. So one of the things growing up with this powerful person was not just that she was powerful inside our family and unpredictable and mercurial, is that the whole world, she was that way. I had dinner last night with Father Patrick Toohey. I don't know if you folks know him. He's a local Jesuit. And he was talking about my grandmother, my mom's mom, and how he knew her. And I didn't know her as well. She died when I was 13. And he was telling these stories about my grandmother. And I thought, oh my God, my grandmother was like that too. And she was 6 feet tall. And so she was 6 feet tall, Rita Hayworth.
Wow.
And my mom was 4'11". Indigenous Rita Hayworth. So, and so the photo, I think, to show her beauty, in fact, the paperback, we're going to have more photos of her, because one of the things, I don't know if you have this family too, that we have hoarders in our family who treat past possessions like valuable things to keep from other family members. So family photographs, people had been hoarding them and keeping them away, and I wanted some of these that I knew existed but wasn't sure. So my sisters, who are a year younger than me, they're twins, did a ninja thing and broke into one of our aunt's houses and stole a few shoe boxes of photographs. So I was able now to have access to images of my own mother. And one of them is really striking. If you go online, you can actually see it. We've put it up on various places, but I don't know where she's at. It looks like a work camp, like a government work camp, but she's leaning back against this sort of prefab-looking house, and she is posing in such a way that it's the first time I've ever thought of my mother as a youngster in her teen years being completely aware of pop culture. She was such a reservation-based woman, such a small-town woman, that I had never thought about her having cosmopolitan ambitions. Of having urban ambitions, and then seeing the way she was so self-aware of how she looked and how she looked to a camera. It looks like a image from a 1950s movie magazine, and it's startling, and it really made me think about my mother in a new way, and the ways in which her gifts and her weaknesses are very much in me. And I look at that photo and I think about the power of her vanity and the power of mine.
I want to ask you if you'd read chapter 127. I heard you say in an interview recently that you wish that you could defy the laws of physics. And I cried when I heard you say that. It was on Fresh Air with Terry Gross. It hit the nail on the head in terms of you wish you could defy the law of physics and go back and be your mom's parent. So if you would read that.
Yes, it's a poem. It's called Physics. I want to reverse this earth and give birth to my mother, because I do not believe that she was ever adored. I want to mother the mother who often did not mother me. I was mothered and adored by mothers not my own, and learned how to be adoring by being adored. So if I adore my mother after giving birth to this new version of her, will she change history and become one who openly and freely adores her daughters and sons? I don't know. I don't know if it's possible in any potential world, but give me a time machine and I'll give this shit a whirl.
Wow. So it's pretty clear that your mom had a challenging upbringing. There's another section in the book, I think it was shortly after you decided to leave the reservation and go to a white school in Reardon, that just an unimaginable series of tragic events. 3 family members, close family members to your mother, passed away. And you wrote this section of the book that just blew me away, where at that funeral, your mother almost literally broke.
And this, I mean, I left the reservation school to go to the white school on the border, and that first month I was there, my mom's brother died of cirrhosis. That December, her mother died of cancer. And then in January, my big sister died in a house fire in Montana. So not only had I left the reservation and left my family and began the process of leaving, my mother lost 3 very close family members. And I remember coming to my sister's funeral from school, her wake, and it was in the basketball gym on the reservation. And I walked in, and my mother, who was in the front row, walked up to my sister's coffin and her husband's coffin as well. They both died in the house fire. My mom walked up to my sister's coffin, and she cried in a way, and this sound escaped her that I'd never heard before and I haven't heard since. This grief noise that really sounded like every bone in her body broke. And looking back at that moment, I think that's when her soul broke. I think that's when her trust in the world, her love of the world broke. And I don't think she was ever capable of loving the world and loving us and loving herself in the same way again. I think that grief broke her that day. And talking about it, I can still hear that noise.
I want to talk a little bit more about your decision to leave the reservation. Was it 7th grade? You opened your math book on the first day of school, a 30-year-old math book, and you saw your mother's maiden name.
My mom's maiden name was handwritten in it. It was my mother's math book.
How was it? I'm astounded that a 7th grade kid had the self-awareness and the awareness of the world to know, I have to leave this environment if I want to have a shot at life. Or is that what, I mean, am I over?
I was self-possessed, but the irony, the weirdness of it is that it all happened. I was self-possessed because I was born hydrocephalic and I had brain surgery at 5 months of age and then again at 2. But because of the brain surgery and the resulting complications, I ended up spending half my life in and out of hospitals for the first 7 years of my life. So rather than having my peer group be my siblings and other kids on the reservation, my peer group ended up being doctors and nurses and nuns and physical therapists and speech therapists. So, I mean, you become who you're with. So I was a little reservation Indian kid who was around all these obsessive, compulsive, type A, workaholic white people.
So you're feeling pretty good right now.
Yeah. I have many tribes. And so, and like a lot of really critically and terminally and seriously ill children, when you ask them what they want to be, wherever they're from, you ask them what they want to be, a lot of them will say, doctor. I think it's a religious experience, much in the way that many of us want to become priests to connect to God. When we're little, we think about it. I think sick kids want to become doctors in the same way because our healthcare providers become our priests. So because I was so sick and because I had these dreams of becoming a doctor, I was immediately different than everybody in my small town. I had these ambitions sewn into my head. And I can remember going to a basketball camp in 6th grade, and we had to fill out these forms that said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it was kids from all over Eastern Washington, so it was, 380 white kids and me, because it's Eastern Washington. And they had all these lists on all my teammates at that basketball camp. It all said, what do you want to be? Supersonic, 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 trailblazer. And mine said pediatrician. So it was so built into me that I was going to be a pediatrician that everything I did was geared toward that. So I had preschool ambitions of becoming a doctor.
That's amazing. One thing that I've always been intrigued with is that human beings, when they go through real adversity, really awful experiences, tend to take two paths. At least it's been my experience to see this. Sometimes they just go off the rails and they self-destruct and they beat their own kids and they beat their own spouses and they become addicted and they go off the tracks. And then others, like you, go through adversity, and instead of being derailed by the adversity, you do quite the opposite, and you become almost superhuman. Your mother, she never said she loved you in your whole life?
I don't remember her ever saying it, no. Not until the end. In fact, my sisters called me when she was on the deathbed and said, you need to get here, and my wife and sons and I drove from Seattle to our house on the reservation, and my sister was waiting outside. And I thought it meant I was too late. I thought it meant my mom had already died, and I got out of the car and I went to hug my sister and I was crying. And I said, I'm sorry I'm late. And she goes, no, she's alive. I just had to warn you. And I said, warn me what? Well, I wanted to be out here to warn you before you went in that Mom is being affectionate. Anybody else? Yeah. And when you read the book, you'll learn my mother was conceived by rape. My big sister was conceived by rape. So the genocide of Native Americans, the oppression, the racism, the classism, the misogyny directed toward Native women, which still continues. Native American women and First Nations women are still, the most assaulted, abused, disappeared, murdered people in North America, and my mother was not spared that. So I was raised by a very traumatized person, my father as well. But even in the midst of all that, my parents were really funny. I mean, somebody asked me that recently on stage, what's the thing about your mother that you miss the most? She was always incredibly funny. Spokane, years ago, I don't think it was you, but somebody from Spokane went out to the reservation, a TV crew, to interview her about me. I quit doing those because it got creepy. But I don't interview my mom, but I have the tape of that somewhere. They didn't use it, of course, but the reporter, I think it was Tom Soa maybe, said, so how would you describe your son's work? How would you describe your son as a person and as a writer? And my mom said, well, he's like 17% book smart and like 83% dick jokes. So
Wow,
I mean,
look at the time.
yeah. So I mean, that was my mom. So you can tell I didn't fall far from the tree. And
But the point I was making
yes,
is that bringing it back full circle.
tangents are sacred
I know.
among my people.
But the kind of dad you are today, the kind of husband you are today, was something that you very deliberately did, right?
Well, I mean, I'm okay. It's funny, some site called fatherly.com, I think it's called, sent me an email and they wanted to name me one of their fathers of the year. And I wrote back, I said, you don't even know me. I could be a really terrible human being. You just wanted a brown guy. You know, and you thought, oh, we haven't honored a native dad yet. Let's honor the native dad brown guy. Father of the year, I could be terrible. I'm not, but I could be. But, I mean, I have all sorts of issues. I'm very open about this. I mean, I'm bipolar. I have a wicked case of PTSD. I've collapsed twice during this career and ended up in residential rehab for my emotional and mental problems. I carry around pills for everything that's wrong with me. I mean, I have a pill case, and I'm obsessed with finding the perfect one. So if you ever see me in a pharmacy or in Target, it's me looking for the perfect pill case. And I've got so many pills in them, it sounds like a powwow rattle. I can actually sing, you know, yeah. Lamictal, Prozac, Lamictal, yeah. So I'm not unspared.
But do you know what?
I've just had the privilege, the incredible privilege that shouldn't be a privilege, but it is a privilege. I've had the incredible privilege of growing into an adult who can afford amazing health care. And afford, you know, amazing medications and afford the best in Seattle. I mean, I had brain surgery a year and a half ago, and my career and my life is such. Well, we discovered a meningioma 8 years ago, and then a friend of mine died of brain cancer, and at his funeral, I called my neurologist, Dr. Rich Ellenbogen, who some of you probably know, and I called up Rich, and I said, hey, I think I should come in and get that meningioma looked at again. And he said, okay, come in Monday. So my life is such that I can call on Thursday from a funeral and be in the MRI machine on Monday morning, which is how it should be for everybody. And I mean, you all know that. You're Rotarians. That's the stuff you fight for. And so I have that. So I mean, so I have all of that to protect me, to save me, to help me. I have an amazing wife who's Native, who went through many similar traumas and is much more put together than I am. So, I mean, what popped into my head is I'm a trapeze artist of my life, but my wife is those ropes. Wow. You know, that harness. My wife is the harness. And she's not always happy about it. I mean, a couple of years ago, a woman came up to her and said, your husband, he is so charming. It must be so fun to live with him. And she just looked at her. Yeah.
Sherman, I wish we had another hour. I want to just ask you one final question. This NFL controversy of players taking a knee, thinking of the irony when I see African American men in Redskins uniforms kneeling during the national anthem to protest racism in America. Wow. Well, just want to know your thoughts, if you could.
Well, as a Native American, you just get used to being ignored, even by other brown people. You get used to being diminished. So your liberalism, my liberalism, ends up having to not include us. You know, I cannot consider what good or bad will happen for Native American people when I vote, because both parties ignore us pretty well. So it ends up, we Native Americans really do end up voting for you in a way that other groups don't. But that said, I support the protest. I support Kaepernick. I support taking a knee. And it was interesting, too, as I was thinking about it. Every time I hear America the Beautiful, why isn't that our anthem? I mean, that is a beautiful, beautiful song. It's gorgeous. We could just play the Ray Charles version every single time. And the third verse is not about slavery. I mean, that's one of the amazing things, that when people defend the national anthem, you're defending the first verse. The second verse gets iffy. The third verse is pro-slavery. So our national anthem is pro-slavery. So we shouldn't have it, number one, and I mean, there's all sorts of things to say about the tumultuous times we're in, the shattering of convention, the disrespect brought to the office of the president, and the shame we're all going to feel, especially those of you who voted for him. If you're in here, some of you are probably still in defensive mode, like I'm going to defend, but the revelations are still coming. All of you at one point or another are going to quit on him, and then your shame is going to be at a level accordingly. And we're going to look back at this era and wonder how this happened. And I'll just say, and my joke has been, if you're more anti-immigrant than an Indian, then you need to reevaluate your politics.
Ladies and gentlemen, Chairman Alexie, thank you.